So, the Met Gala. It's kind of a big deal. Every year, a bunch of people dress up, raise money, and frankly, either stun us or make us entirely regret having eyeballs. Here's a brief look at this year's theme.
What I pulled most from the theme for this project was the idea of losing costume pieces through deterioration and time.
And also a brief look at a design I made based off of that.
I decided to go with an evening bodice instead of a day bodice when making this for the sake of time, and if I had to change anything, I would have made it a lighter blue than the blue that I did choose, and I would have added deteriorating and dying florals to the bustle of the dress and into the hair.
And I don't have time and I don't have money. And I did this during finals. So here is my attempt at a Met Gala dress. Before I can even get started on thinking about making this dress, I actually have to make the underwear to make this possible. I do have a chemise and a corset and drawers and such. I ordered stockings online. What I actually need now is a hoop skirt. I would like to say that I was smart and I thought about my time management and simply purchased one online to save time and probably money. That's not what I'm here to say though. I am here to say that I made a stupid decision and decided to build my own hoop skirt from scratch. Also because it is significantly harder to find a good elliptical hoop skirt, which is one that isn't just straight up bell-shaped, it has a slight bustle in the back. For the shaping of my hoop skirt, I took inspiration from Bella May Designs hoop skirts, as well as the hoop skirt used for the Cinderella live-action movie, and hoop skirts from historical fashion. Because I'm not entirely the stupidest person ever, I did order pre-encased boning. Hooray for good decisions! Once I had my boning, I went ahead and made a big white tube of just some bias cut strips from an old bed sheet. These I fashioned into a waistband and the vertical strips that would hold up the boning. Once I had these down, I compared my pattern that I was going to be using for the ball gown skirt and discovered that 125 centimeter inches. This is America. 125 inches was going to be the circumference of my largest hoop. From there, the hoops would descend in size, as well as a few tilted hoops, so that I can actually have it kick out in the back. I really struggled with this at first, just because the hoops didn't want to keep their shape and they kept trying to curl back into the little tiny circles they came in the packaging. Eventually though, I figured it out and it started to actually make sense. A big part of this was adding those tilted hoops in. They really helped keep the shape of the skirt. Also during this process, I figured out it's finally warm enough to wear jorts! Once again, solidifying my place as the #1 dad. So the hoop skirt is coming along mildly well. It's just that the ends of them, because it comes in a pre-packaged roll, the ends of my pieces curl in really severely. So I'm gonna see if I can do some reshaping by heating it up with my iron and then cooling it down into the shape I want and seeing if the plastic will hold then. This actually looks pretty good. Lots of trial and error, but now I get to start sewing it together. Look at her! Look at her go! And once it was all tacked together, I had a hoop skirt. I'm very excited. This is my first hoop skirt I've ever had or made. I made one a long time ago that I wouldn't even count as a hoop skirt because I specifically made it out of recyclable materials and threw it away the morning after I used it. Of course, to go over the hoop skirt, I will need a petticoat. This I just accomplished by ripping up another bed sheet and putting in some gussets, or pizza slices, as the great Makara Tours likes to say, pleating that up into a waistband, and there you have it. Essentially, I just made a white skirt as my petticoat. I may go back in and add some ruffles before the project's entirely finished, but for now, I'm just keeping it simple so I can spend more time on the actual bodice and skirt. The last piece of underwear that needs to be constructed for this project is the corset cover. Corset covers historically were used for smoothing out the harsh line that the bust of a corset can give. They can be made very elaborately from different types of laces and such, or they can be made very simply. I'm going the simple route and cutting out a big long rectangle of some scrap cotton that I had left over. I'm then going ahead and hemming that rectangle on all four sides and using some of my spare straps from the hoop skirt as shoulder straps. This corset cover closes up the front with a couple of snaps, and I also went ahead and added a little bit of lace details to it just to pretty it up a bit. It's gathered down to fit the waist, and because of the sliced open look of this dress, this is where we start tearing things apart. I unfortunately have to now cut into part of my lovely new corset cover and fold and pin that back, give it a press under the iron, and tack the pieces into place so that it now looks as if it is being held open by a big rip. Now that all of our undergarments have been constructed and then semi-destroyed, it's time to work on the bodice. I'm going to get started cutting out pieces for the bodice, and fun fact, this pattern was a last-minute addition to the patterns 4 years ago. It was one of the first historical patterns I ever attempted making. It was from a Janet Arnold book, and I did not have paper I wanted to use for it, and I wanted to be able to check it on my mannequin. So these are my childhood bed sheets. If anyone was wondering, I had a spring flower themed room with IKEA lights in it. I could just use this again. It was a bad idea. Starting in on my blue velvet and my gold lining, I am cutting on in using my pattern that, as you can see, is drawn out on my childhood bed sheets. Very professional. This wasn't too big of a problem because I did end up being able to take it in a little and fit it to me. The main problem was the fact that I had to completely cut the straps off of the back. It was fine, I made it work, but it just wasn't fun to do. There was a puckering issue with the way the bed sheet pattern worked out, and I need to throw this away. Probably won't, probably will use it again, probably will use it many, many times more. I think somehow that I'm wearing the most staticky pants possible. Once my bodice and lining have both been cut out, I go ahead and I seam the pieces together until I have two nearly identical lining and outer fabric pieces. For extra stability, I am going ahead and adding some extra spare pieces of boning that I had into some of the seams of the bodice. I do actually have a bodice, or most of a bodice. She's missing something. My lining fabric snagged and I had to get rid of a bunch of it up here, so I do not have back straps. What I'm thinking I'll do is I'll just put together some scrap pieces and I'll piece in some straps for it, because regardless, this is gonna get a collar put on it, so it'll be fine. Once the bodice and lining are attached, I can treat them then as one piece. I'm going ahead and adding 12 hook and eye closures up the center back. Next, I'm going ahead and just throwing some sleeves on there. Nothing too terribly complicated, just two long tapered rectangles that are scrunched into the arm's eye and hand sewn into place. The style of dress that I am doing here is often called a Bertha collar. This is referring to the V-shaped piece of fabric that gets added onto the neckline. And then attached to that Bertha piece is a nice ruffly bit of velvet all around the neckline of the bodice. And now that we have a complete bodice, it's time to rip it open. We are done with the bodice if this was a normal project. Unfortunately, I have orchestrated a project that hinges entirely on my willingness to rip it apart once it's done, so I guess we're doing that. I went ahead and added a ruffle along the collar and put it on my mannequin with the chemise that I made earlier also underneath it. So that hole that was in the chemise is under here so that I can match the hole in this. There are bones along most of the seams except this seam, so I'm gonna rip it open. This took so long. So it's ripped open now, and I'm just gonna fold and pin it back until I'm satisfied with the way it looks. I like how this is turning out. I am going to do the same thing I did to the corset cover and add just a little piece of elastic across the waistband just to help keep it pinched in, because I spent a long time getting this to be shaped right, and I'll be darned if I'm gonna lose that. She looks so cool! I am so psyched about this, dude. Okay, so now I'm going to go through and get all of this tacked into place by hand, and then we can start working on the skirt. To draft the pattern for this skirt, I'm drafting it directly onto the back side of my fabric. I'm drawing this directly onto the back of the fabric, as I am working with an upholstery fabric that I got for free.
122, 23, no.
24,
24, 24,
24,
24,
24.
Super chill.
24.
24, 24, 24, 24.
23.
Don't do that to me.
Don't do this to me. I can only cut these pieces once. I did just realize while you're filming this, I would love to hear the transcript of this conversation.
It brings joy to my editing days, I'm not gonna lie. These ones where I'm cutting fabric, I listen to the entire thing even if there's an hour of footage, because chances are that we're talking in the background of these.
Yeah.
So if there's a video of me on this floor, I watch the entire thing, every time.
I will burn your apartment down.
Please don't.
See, I'm just gonna go with my initial plan, which was to
is
slowly bring more and more
of my stuff.
marketing supplies.
Once everything's been marked out, I can begin cutting. The pattern I am using was taken from the Historical Pattern Archive by Thomas John Bernard and Marcy Linton. I've used this book a couple times before for my patterns, and so I rely on my previous experience to know that it'll come out looking kind of like I want it to.
Just to get a sense of how big this thing is, I have to stand on my couch to get it all in camera. This is center front, and it goes all the way here to center back. This will be pleated into the waist. This will be stitched together and hemmed up, but it's just massive. Like, this is just me standing on this small piece, and it's just, ooh, he a big boy.
After all the pieces have been cut and seamed together, I am not lining this for the sake of time. I will line the skirt at a later date once I can make it a complete wearable garment instead of an art piece. For now, I'm just tacking back the seam allowance so it lays flat. Once all my seam allowances have been taken care of, I go ahead and I am marking out different measures on my waistband. Each measure represents a panel of the skirt that will be pleated down to fit into the waistband. Once pleated down, the skirt is attached to the waistband. For my waistband, I'm just using a bit of twill tape. I'm not sure if I mentioned this before, but for the gap in the skirt, I am leaving out the left center front panel. Instead of cutting into a pre-existing skirt, I am simply omitting a panel. That way I already have the room worked in.
So I was looking at the way this sits, and because there isn't a panel there, there isn't weight there, which means that this was sticking out a lot, and it wasn't like the whole thing, instead of being bell-shaped like this, it was like flat back here and just going out there, and it's a little like that now, but I made it better because I added weight to it. How did I do that? I looked all around my room and I thought, what in here weighs the most? A hammer that I just wrapped in some twill tape and sewed in there. So from the side, you can kind of see where he's at, but from the front, it's pretty well disguised.
After that brief bit of engineering, because wow, am I discovering things, I made sure to slap a hem on the bottom of my skirt. I did this after I had tried it on top of the hoop skirt because I wanted to make sure that everything was falling evenly and that the train was doing what I wanted to. This dress does have just the slightest bit of train to it, so I wanted to make sure my hem wasn't going to interrupt that. Once the skirt's been finished, I can now get started on the beading.
Now, if younger me had ever wanted to make American Girl doll caviar, this would have been the way to do it, man.
When beading the corset cover and the bodice, as well as the skirt and the petticoat, I started with strands of beads that were tied closely together at intervals along a piece of thread, and then lined the outside, outlined. I outlined the gap and holes that I created within the garment with these beads. Then, once all the edges were covered in beads, I then took strands of beads that were strung about an inch apart. I just eyeballed them and tied off onto the string so that they were shining at different intervals, and started attaching those in loops and zigzags around the edges. There was not a whole lot of method to this madness. I tried to distribute the amount of beads as evenly as possible. If I had to change anything about the way I did the beading, I would certainly have started with the skirt instead of the bodice, because as I got to the skirt, I did indeed begin to run out of beads. So I had to be very strategic about how I was placing them.
once I've just about lost my mind to the woes of beading, I can call this dress finished, and it's time for a reveal.
I am happy with how this dress came out, and I did cut into it in such a way that I'll be able to patch it back together into just being a plain blue ball gown, and I think I'll really enjoy having that as part of my collection. And honestly, I really hope that one day I get to come back to this idea and try making this again a little closer to what I wanted. As always, I'm Art by LGO on TikTok, Instagram, and Patreon. I have a website, artbylgo.com. I have lots of other YouTube videos with much more successful projects, and I hope to see you for next month's video as well. Have a great day.
Allen bisschen Otto normal, do. I do not speak German.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
This project's going great. Don't I?